Hello, ID60. So this week's lecture has two parts. We're going to be talking about mixing patterns and also styling beds. So let's go. Okay, so the first lecture is about mixing patterns. So we're going to learn about the different types of patterns, key principles for mixing patterns, layering patterns in different styles, practical applications, and common mistakes and how we want to avoid them. So pattern types. So one pattern type is geometric. So geometric is very mathematical and it's very rhythmic and you sort of know exactly what's coming. There are no surprises. They are symmetrical and they are repetitive. So examples would be stripes, chevrons, grids. They're often used in modern or minimalist styles, but that is not an absolute. Like when I look at this image, it seems very much sort of a country image, but it has the stripe in the back with the gingham on the table. Both would be considered geometric. And even the plates look as if they have like a basket weave. I would consider that geometric as well. And then we have organic patterns. So organic patterns are inspired by nature. So leaves, florals, vines, they tend to read as softer and much more feminine. So they're organic and they are less predicting. So you may see a flower in one spot and then see it located someplace else, but not exactly where you would expect it. And then there is abstract pattern. So abstract patterns are just really irregular and expressive. So they have a contemporary feel, but they're hard to predict. So you're not sure if a certain color is coming. There is no rhythmic nature to it at all. And then we also have textural patterns, and I kind of hesitate to call it a textural pattern because technically texture is texture and pattern is pattern, but oftentimes in staging and in interiors, we use these textures as patterns because they add interest where maybe you don't want any color at all or very little color, you want all neutrals. The thing that gives it the most interest is this texture, which often is repetitive. If it's a weave, it starts to act as a pattern, even though technically it's texture because it's sort of monochromatic. And here's a really good example. So this bed layout is really pretty neutral, but the thing that makes it really interesting is the different textures that are happening in the bed. So the bed is sort of layered in these textures. So we're kind of incorporating that into the idea of layering pattern. So the most important thing in terms of, for me, interior design and how it becomes successful is this rule of three. And so hopefully, and I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure I talked about the rule of three in color, where you really need to have some high key colors, so light colors, and then you need to have some medium colors, and then you need to have some dark colors. And that's really what helps balance the space. And so even if you're not working with colors, because that can get tricky, the value is what you're really looking for. So even if your space is all pink, you want to have some really light, maybe almost white pinks, some medium value pinks, and then some darker pinks. And then that gives a lot of richness and a lot of fullness. The same thing with patterns, except now we're talking about scale. So you want to have some really large scale patterns. You want to have some medium patterns, and then you want to have some small patterns that almost start to read as texture. So that helps add interest to the space. It also helps the patterns not compete with each other. If all of the pattern was the exact same size, your eye wouldn't know where to focus. But when you have a large pattern, medium patterns, and small patterns, hierarchy starts to happen in the room, and then your eye can just sort of naturally flow through. So when we're looking at this image of the orange room, I have this sort of larger area rug that creates a motif or a pattern at the floor. And then I move up and I have some medium patterns, but on the wall, I have smaller patterns. When I look at this space, the same thing happens. So I have a larger pattern happening on the floor. I have medium pattern happening in the pillows, and actually small pattern happening in the pillows, but then there's also a lot of solids, which can start to act as a canvas, or if it's texture, a very, very small pattern that happens that acts as a canvas for your medium and large patterns. If putting all of these different patterns together is something that really scares you, one of the key ways to help all of your patterns meld together and work together in harmony is to keep them all in the same color family and in the same value. So, for instance, I think this space is really a good example, and that really it's very monochromatic. It's very achromatic, actually, because it has no color. But the patterns, they still work. So there's, I would say, medium, larger on the floor. And then this sofa starts to act as texture, which makes it either a solid or a very small pattern. And then I even have, for me, this art is working as a pattern or a motif, and it's actually even a larger scale. They all work together, even though I feel like the patterns don't necessarily correlate with each other. They're not at all the same shape. Some of, like the carpet is very random, whereas the window treatment and the sofa are more geometric. But because they're all the same value, they're all the same, I want to say color, even though we know gray is not a color, they work together well. Same thing happening with this sofa. All of my pillows and the sofa fabric are all in the color blue. This time they're varying in value. So some of them are light value, some of them are dark value. The scale of the pattern is changing, so it works, right? So if in doubt, you want to do this pattern thing, but you're kind of unsure and you want to sort of make sure it works, just dive into the same color. Could be high value to low value, or it could be all of the same value, but the pattern is what will give it the interest. Also, and we've talked about this, is that you want to keep a lot of white space around your patterns in order to let the eye rest. So if it's not a very, very tiny pattern or texture, you want to make sure that there's a lot of blank space that happens around to break up sort of this heavy pattern and the busyness that happens once you start layering these different patterns together. So in this case, I have a lot of visual interest that's happening on this sofa, but the sofa itself is pretty much a solid color, and the wall behind it is a solid color. So it's allowing those pillows to sort of pop and be the interesting thing, as opposed to everything else just kind of relaxes and acts as a backdrop. So there is the style of patterns matching everywhere. So I will say that this probably isn't as in vogue or in style as it used to be, but it still does exist. So when you get to some of your occupied staging situations, you may see this happen where the wallpaper matches the pillow, matches the drape, matches the chair, matches the bed. So that is possible. What I would do to make it successful is to have some relief. So in this case, I have this solid yellow chair. So again, it's a relief. It's a something that helps the eye relax before you come to that pattern again. Same thing is happening here. as opposed to here. So when I look at these two together, really it just starts to blend. So if that's what your goal is, to make the headboard sort of go away, then this is a perfect way to do that. But if your goal was to make the headboard pop, then this probably isn't the best scenario to go with. Also, and I'm sorry I don't have an image of it, but one of the things that you should also do is look at your pattern. And when you, so if you have a main pattern, like for instance, if this was my main pattern, there's sort of a triangle or a diamond shape that's represented there, even though it's a little abstract, a little floral. But in the patterns that I choose to go with it, I may start to look for that same element, that same diamond, that same triangle to help pull those things together. So you're looking for sort of a key element that you can use in different scales, and then that helps to keep the design cohesive. So you want to make sure you balance your pattern. So again, that means probably giving it some white space in between. So I think the image here is a little less successful, again, because it's pattern on top of pattern on top of pattern, and it's the same pattern. So for me, it falls a little flat because there's not a whole, there is some change in value, but for the most part, because it is all the same blue, it feels a little flat, even a little dusty. Whereas when I go to the image here, because there's a lot of white space, those patterns pop from that white wall. So again, the white wall acts as a canvas. The sofa is acting as a canvas to help those pillows look special. So here in this image, the patterns look special, right? You look at them, they look important. As opposed to here, because there's pattern everywhere that's exactly the same, it's sort of less important. It diminishes the specialness of it. So traditional, so the layering of patterns also happens in traditional designed homes. A lot of times there are damask or florals, which tend to be sort of organic or soft or curly, mixed with plaids, which is sort of nice because there's an element that grounds, which is the graphic or the geometric pattern. And it contrasts with the sort of floral toile de jouy that I see on the pillows happening here or on the floral. So it's a nice contrast of textures that happens in a more traditional space. And then we have the boho. And so boho is all about mixing textures and patterns and colors. But again, most boho interiors that you see will have a very white, bright background. And again, it's acting as a canvas for the patterns and the color. So in this first one, we have a really white background. And I would say even the art in this space is starting to become pattern. And then I have a sofa, which does have a pattern, but it's very subtle, right? So the subtle pattern is what's framing out the bigger, bolder patterns. Again, I see big, medium, and small in both of these. Right. And so again, white space, but the solid green sofa frames out those patterns and gives your eyes some place to rest. Modern design, it's also possible to have a mix of patterns. It happens in a more restrained way. In the case here in this image, I have my beige interior, which is what we've been saying over and over and over again, is great for staging because it is just sort of neutral. But if you want to add some character to it, you can always add patterns. So in this case, I have my area rug that is the large pattern, and I have my sofa that's the medium pattern, and then it's balanced by the white and this darker pillow, which may have some sort of texture. And then I have one black pillow. And so again, when I think back to our color lecture, how we're sort of going with this high tone or high value, medium value, low value, this space is doing that to create interest. So even though it really has no color, I have these white pillows, right, that are adding a high pop of color. Most of the space is this sort of medium brown. Then I have a little bit of darker brown, and then I have just a touch of black in this one pillow and on the tabletops. So again, it's giving me big, medium, solid or texture in terms of pattern. And then it's also giving me dark, medium, and light. So successful interior space. Same thing's happening here, right? So I have a bigger pattern happening on the bed. It's a big open wide grid. I have sort of a medium pattern happening on the pillows, a smaller pattern happening on the draperies, and then I have a subtle contrast in neutrals. So this is transitional. So transitional style is really the idea of traditional mixed with a contemporary style. So some of the furniture pieces have a feel of traditional, but they're not true in the style of traditional furniture. So again, I have pattern on my carpet, I have pattern in the pillows, and the backdrop stays pretty neutral. Same with the bed here. So I have a lot of texture that's acting as pattern. So big textures, small textures, works the same. So the most practical application of pattern is probably in your textiles. So in curtains, bedding, rugs, and specifically pillows, because they're easy to change, right? So if you leave your space pretty neutral, you could really play with the texture of the pattern in the pillows. And if in a year you don't like it anymore, it's not that big a deal to get rid of a pillow cover, slip on another one, and do something completely different. So textiles, specifically pillows, are probably the easiest and most economical way to deal with this idea of layering of pattern. Wallpaper and upholstery is a little bit more, you're locked in, right? Because you're not going to want to repaper your walls or reupholster your sofa in a year. You want that to really last. So if you're choosing to go with a bold wallpaper, just make sure you love it, because it'll be around. And in this case, I think this is really charming. And it feels like this wallpaper is very similar to the bedding. I don't think it's the same. The bedding, the print is a little smaller, but the idea of echoing what happens on the wall in a small way, right? Like before we saw everything was matchy matchy. But in this case, I have pillows and a sheet that are similar. They don't match exactly, but are similar to the wallpaper. But then I have a lot of other solids and textures and patterns that are happening in that space. You can also, do a temporary, can't see my fingers, temporary-ish type of wallpaper. So if you are non-committal, maybe you go buy a piece of drywall, you just wallpaper that particular wall, and it's something you slip behind your bed. I think that's sort of a nice way to do that and not be married to it. It also could be a really good opportunity for our mid and short term rentals, like our Airbnbs, because it's an eye catcher, right? So you could have this one small statement wall that's really busy, but sort of frames out the bed and just gives a pop. So I like that idea as well. And these people committed, and I really like both of these. We have grassy fields on our wall, but I think it really works. So there is a lot of green happening here, and I would say this space is an analogous color way, which makes it relatively calm. So even though the wallpaper is pretty busy and is a pretty specific pattern, so this is definitely for a particular person, or maybe it's a short-term rental that has a lot of character. Maybe it's on a golf course or a lake or something. But the space itself, I think, works because it did stay in this one sort of colorway of all greens. and it's shifting a little bit into the blue greens and the blues. So they're all really relating to each other. There's not a lot of contrast happening, even though there's a lot of pattern happening. As opposed to this one, pretty opposite, right? Like I feel like the wallpaper is really pretty contemporary. And the sofa fabric looks sort of like it has an ethnic feel to it, but they work together almost because they're opposites. And I think the artwork and the accessories that are happening on the table really pull the two together. So I think they're both good jobs, but much bolder than typically what you will see in staging, but definitely styling and midterm rentals, they would work. And also, I really wanted to tell you tiles and I guess just tiles, whether they're in the wall or in the floor, are pretty permanent. Like it takes a lot. That's a remodel when you're pulling out tile. And I probably would have said, oh, just do as neutral, do calm, do whatever. And then I saw this image and I was like, that's pretty cool though. So most likely if you have the opportunity in a staging moment where you are redoing the kitchen and doing tiles, I most definitely would probably stay neutral, but I just had to show you this picture of these tiles where the tiles are one thing on the floor, but then they inverse on the black backsplash. And then I'm not sure if these are tiles or wallpaper, but there's pattern all over layered, right? And so the only place I'm really getting any rest for my eye are on these sort of blue areas, and there's not a lot, but I think it's a really cool space. Um, and also when you are thinking about pattern, you also have to consider the elements that are happening in the room. So in this case, I think the bookshelves are definitely working as pattern. They are a really important and prominent part of this room. And so when I'm looking at the other patterns that have been placed in the space, they definitely represent and reflect what's happening in the bookshelves, right? So when I look at this, I see lines. When I look here, I see lines. I see these lines. When I look at this rug, I see the same colors that are happening in the books. And I can almost guarantee you that the books came before the furniture, because this is a person that loves their books. They're sleeping in the room with their books. So the books are really important. So I can almost guarantee you that the books were the inspiration for the space. And they took those styling cues, the lines, the colors, they took those from the books themselves. Art and accessories. So art, I think, also starts to play an important part in texture. Again, especially if art is an important part of your client's space. So you may really start with the art, just like we started with the books in that last slide. And then the patterns and textures that are added sort of take a note or a hint from the shapes and colors that were happening in the art. So when I look at this wall and I look at these shapes, I kind of see that same thing happening, right? So I feel like a lot of the shapes that are happening in this blue and white sofa are pulled from the art in the space above. A lot of times layering your images starts to create pattern and interest that pulls into sofas, and of course any artwork baskets start to act as texture and pattern. So some common mistakes. Again, we talked about that rule of three. So when I look at this image, I kind of go, man, where am I supposed to look? Except for the view, I'm very confused. Like there's one pattern on one wall, and then it's like the other two walls have pattern. The floor has a pattern, the counter has a pattern, and they're all sort of equal scale, right? So nothing looks special, nothing looks important, and you have this beautiful view that I think this space is detracting from. So again, make sure you're using those rules of three and you're leaving some blank space for your eye to rest. The other image with the fireplace, I think works. So there's not a lot of pattern there, but I think it uses pattern in a very particular way. Very obviously, the fireplace is the focal point in this living room. And so they've taken that pattern around the fireplace. So there is no question as to where you are supposed to look. Like your eye automatically goes to that fireplace first before anything else, right? So I think this one used pattern very intelligently, and I think it's well done. So you want to make sure that when you're mixing patterns, you're using that rule of three. And so mixing patterns is sort of an advanced skill, but if you stick to the rule of three, and if maybe you're scared, so you stick to the same value, same color, or you just stick to the same color, different values, it will make it a lot easier to be able to mix and match the different patterns without having them fight each other. So that was it on pattern. So now we're moving to styling bedding. So styling bedding. So we're going to talk about residential styling, staging for sale, short-term rental specifically, and then some common mistakes. So often, if not always, in the bedroom, the bed is the focal point, right? So styling techniques will depend on who you are designing for and the purpose of the space. Some bedrooms are for like get in there and sleep, and that's it. Other bedrooms might double as an office. Other bedrooms are a sanctuary. So again, it's up to you to either know your demographic of who is going to be purchasing in that area or your client in order to sort of set the tone for what your bedroom is going to be. So your number one priority in the bedroom, I would say, is comfort. So if you are on a limited budget, whether you're styling, staging, designing, definitely short-term rental, the quality of a mattress is super, super, super important. So you want to make sure that the guest that's staying in the space is comfortable, right? Because that is like the number one thing. So I guess this doesn't apply to staging, right? Because nobody's actually going to be sleeping there when you're staging, but it does apply to residential and short-term rental. So you need to make sure the bedrooms function the way they're supposed to function while they're also beautiful. You want to layer some warmth always in the bedroom. You tend not to want the bedroom to be cold and totally impersonable. I'm not saying that right, but you know what I mean. Because you want it to feel warm and cozy. So you definitely want to have high quality sheets. You want to make sure you're not overloading the bed with pillows. So typically 2 sleeping pillows is great. And then you can have shams that add personality and then some sort of accent pillow. And you definitely want to have a blanket to add an extra layer of fluff and cushion at the foot of the bed. So here's another one. So again, just really looks comfy and cozy. So when you're staging, your priority is a broad appeal. So again, you sort of want to stay with neutrals. You want to make it look not only beautiful but functional. So you want the owners or the potential owners to really come in and say, "Oh, I can see myself here," just like every other room. So you want to have some level of elevation, right? You don't want it to look like you just kind of went in and made the bed real quick. You want to make sure that it's thoughtfully done. You've got your iron or your steamer and you're making sure that there are no wrinkles. And you don't want any of your clients' personal things there because it really serves as a distraction. You want the nightstands to be clean and maybe have 2 to 3 items. So again, staging white, crisp, nice sheets, lots of layers so that the bed looks fluffy and full. At least one accent pillow or something that's going to add some contrast. And again, making sure everything is wrinkle free. So when you're looking at short-term rental, it's maybe can be a little bit more fun and a little bit more personalized depending on the space. So short-term rental, really not only comfort is again number one, but I would say number two is the photo moment, right? You want to have a space where somebody's going to Instagram or take a picture. So a really nice backdrop. So you want to have a headboard that stands out, that's creative. In this case, the headboard is lit around the perimeter and it has like a dark wood backdrop with this giraffe photo that pops out because it's super high contrast to the wall behind it. So you want to make sure that your bed is not only comfortable, but that it's photo ready, it's beautiful enough that somebody would want to Instagram it. I actually liked this one because I think it's really sort of atypical. But again, when you're looking at Airbnbs, people are really buying an experience. So I have sort of this terracotta colored wall and I have a mural, and so we talked about like maybe I don't want to live with that mural forever, so I'm going to either wrap it on a piece of wood or I'm going to wallpaper it to a piece of drywall, and I'm just going to press it against the wall so it's maybe removable, but it lends itself to be a really nice backdrop. And it also gives a little effect or dimension to that back wall. So in this case, the bed itself is sort of leather, but again, the sheets are tight, clean, hotel quality. So these are rooms I'm going to sleep. Nothing else is happening in there, right? Well, I take that back. In the bedroom in the corner, there's a little desk there. But again, when we're thinking about short-term rentals, a lot of time the clients need is to be able to max the space out so that it will sleep a lot of people, so that they can get the most money, right? And so sometimes bunk beds happen, and again, they can be clean, they can be nice. Maybe there's not a lot of styling that happens in here, but again, white hotel quality. This one I think is quite nice. It still has the accent pillow, which I think they all could have, right? But this one, the one at the bottom, has a little bit more character. Again, 3-tier bunk bed. This is not, in my opinion, very comfortable sleeping, but it's a lovely space. If they need a little work area, that is there as well. So again, short-term rental, hotel quality, warm, um, ready for photographs. Nightstands are not cluttered. There are chargers on the nightstands. So all of that is the designer's responsibility to know and understand. And any additional amenities, right? So a lot of times those happen in the bedroom. So if you have additional pillows, dimmable lights, light switches that turn off on separate sides of the bed in case one person wants to stay up and read. If you advertise that you are child friendly, right? Make sure you have the things that kids will need. Playpens, traveler sets, even humidifiers are a great idea to suggest. So, in conclusion, a well-styled bed definitely sets the tone in a bedroom. So you want to make sure that you're considering the end user. Is it someone that's going to be sleeping there and it's their home? And this is, for a photo shoot, you're making it extra beautiful. Is it going to be long-term or short-term rental? Additionally, it needs to still be very, very, very comfortable. Like again, this is where you want to spend your money. So sofas in the living room is where you spend your money. Beds or excuse me, mattresses also where you spend your money. You want to make sure that the guests are comfortable. And then you want to make sure that you're layering. So you're layering colors, you're layering textures, you're layering pattern. And that's what makes it interesting. It also elevates it. Like when you're layering your bedding, it's what makes it fluffy and look welcoming. So there you go. And that is the end, I believe. So I will see you in the next lecture. Bye.